Welcome to the Regeneration International podcast.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Alexis Badenmeyer, your host for the Regeneration International podcast. And today we're going to be talking about Midwest Healthy Ag with Rob Wallace, Carolyn Betts, and Ann Wolf. So let's get started by, we'll start with Carolyn. Carolyn, tell us first how this project came about. How did everyone get together and launch Midwest Healthy Ag?
Well, I'm going to defer to Rob because he was here before I was. So
okay, sorry. Well,
sure. Well, it's an interesting story and really speaks to kind of the way our project Midwest Healthy Ag operates. And I'm an evolutionary biologist by training, and I'm part of an organization called the Agroecology and Rural Economics Research Corps. I know it's a mouthful, but we're a group of independent scientists who are trying to fill in this kind of research gap that's developed. A lot of the land-grant universities are largely doing research for large agribusinesses at this point. It's the way they bring in money to cover their overhead. And our group wanted to do more research for smaller community groups. So we had, in 2017, we held a workshop on relationship between science and the community. And we had Patrick Carrigan, who many of you know. He was part of the Organic Consumers Association, Regeneration International. Unfortunately, he passed away recently, but he's an unforgettable character. He showed up to our workshop, and he was so excited and interested. And as you know, some of you know him. So he reached out to us and say, hey, we should work together and we should apply for this grant. And there was a grant that was offered by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is a large foundation that on the East Coast that largely deals with health. And so we got together and started working on this. And this is with Regeneration Midwest. So we had farmers there in that organization. That organization's interested in getting regenerative agriculture propagated through the Midwest. And so we had scientists and farmers and food activists working together on what questions we wanted to ask for this project and what the actual wording of the proposal. So right from the start, farmers and food activists have been part of this. And we submitted the grant, and it was something like 200 applications, and we were one of 8 that were funded. So it's quite amazing. And so we started to work together in 2017 and started working on this project on basically focusing on the relationship between agriculture and across the Midwest. And we'll get into the details of what that involves. And its agriculture's impact on climate mitigation as climate change comes in, what can be done about it, and also population health, what is the health of communities, and finally, agriculture's impact on what's called health equity. Do various communities have equitable access to healthy lives? So that is the start of this, and we've been chugging along for about 2.5 years. And we're kind of wrapping up the first phase of our project. And we're happy to be here today to kind of introduce some of the work that we've been doing.
Wow, very exciting. So you all are hearing about this first here. All right. So tell us a little bit about how this project is structured. Carolyn, do you want to weigh in here?
I do. I have some slides to share. And I realize that some of you aren't seeing this, so I'll try to describe what's on the slide if you're only listening to this as an audio production. As Rob mentioned, we're funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So I think that one of the most important things about the way our project is structured is that we look at regenerative systems as more than just healthy soil. I think that there's a lot of talk these days about regenerative farming and whatnot, but all of these projects, there's many research projects that are going on right now, but they're really all focused on healthy soil and what does it mean, and soil biology. That's like the new key thing. But Rob described that our project is much more comprehensive because we look at things across more on a community level. And what does it mean to have a regenerative community? So the project, as Rob described, we started in 2019, and we're using both quantitative and qualitative methods to look at the differences between regenerative agriculture and conventional agriculture, and how these two types of systems affect climate change and population health. And one of the key methods that we use is listening to farmers and experts on what they know and what they do. So I'll describe a little bit more about how that worked in terms of our day-to-day project, the way that we administered it. You can see we have on the slide, I'm showing that we have a big team, but there's basically 4 of us who are on the day-to-day. Ann and Rob are the co-directors of the project, and then they hired me and a woman named Serena Stein, who's an anthropologist, and both of us are social science researchers. And then we hired 6 different people because we were going to be doing interviews in 6 different states. And so we had the states where we conducted the interviews were Wisconsin, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, and Kansas. And Rob described that Pat Kerrigan wanted us to do all 12 states, but we didn't get multiple millions of dollars. So we narrowed it down to 6 states. So again, in terms of the administrative structure, we also have a couple of people who are doing more of the quantitative research, and we'll describe that as we go into the maps that I'll show. And then we also had a lot of student interns, many student interns. And so the project wasn't just us going out there and talking to people. It was also a learning opportunity for students to become integrated and to learn about how research is done. So that's kind of the administrative structure of the project. So what I'm showing on the slides now, on the slide, is that our research started by looking at the 2017 Agricultural Statistical Service databases. And what we did was we mapped all 1,055 counties across the Midwest to put them in a category of being either more regenerative or more conventional. So we used an index that took characteristics of each of these different types of farming and also some other attributes. And we were able to assign a numeric value to each county based on the characteristics of being more regenerative or more conventional. And then one of our, Luke Bergman, who's one of our computer wizards, was able to do his magic and come up with this numeric evaluation or enumeration of each one of the counties. And so I'm showing on this map, the upper Midwest, Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, and parts of Ohio are really more regenerative than they are conventional. So if you look at it as a continuum, they're on the regenerative side of the continuum. And then other parts of the Midwest, so you have a big swath that goes from western Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, down through Iowa, and then most of Indiana, and then a big swath that's in southwestern Kansas and Nebraska that are much more on the conventional side. So those are big swaths of parts of the Midwest that are more conventional than they are regenerative. So if you look at the map, you'll understand that, we really are a very diverse group of people, and we have very different farming systems. So we really wanted to dig deeper into that. So what we did was, in terms of like how the project was run, is that we selected one regenerative county and one conventional county in each of the 6 states. And then with the people that we hired on the ground level, the state coordinators who I mentioned before, they helped us because they're most familiar with the state and different parts of the state. They were able to help us identify the farmers that we were going to interview. And so we ended up interviewing 94 individual farmers. And then we also conducted focus groups where people came together who had something in common. So, for example, they might be women in agriculture. They might be people who work with the supply chains. We tried to do a few BIPOC focus groups. So those are for people of color. And then we also interviewed experts. So we had 31 expert interviews in the 6 states altogether. So some of those were really diverse. Some of them were mental health specialists. Some of them were school district administrators or a high school principal. We had some clergy people. So it was a whole variety of people that we interviewed who were considered to be experts in their region. So what did we ask the farmers? Each of these interviews with the farmers was about 2 hours long, so they were very intense. Each of them was recorded with the permission of the person. Everything is confidential. And we asked them basically 6 different themes. We had 6 different themes. The first one was on the farm history. Like, can you describe the history of your farm? So some people were, oh, I'm a 5th generation farmer, and the farm started in 1850, and first we were a dairy farm, and then we had chickens and blah blah blah, and then going up to today's what the status is today. We also asked them questions about if they have a succession plan in place, and how did they make transitions over time. So it could be when the father died or the grandfather died, and the next generation comes in, and then something changed on the farm. The second theme was about the effects of COVID on their farm operation and their farm income and how it affected their community. So we had a whole big section on that. The interviews, by the way, were conducted in 2021. So we started last January, a year ago, and they went all the way through September. So we interviewed people. It was very interesting because we interviewed people as the pandemic progressed. So in other words, when we started in Wisconsin in January, there was no vaccine on the scene, and then people started getting the vaccine, and then there was the whole mask controversy and so on. So we kind of watched it as it moved through time. The third category of the interviews was about healthcare access, health insurance, and health equity. So, it was interesting to hear people who had CSA farms, and, a lot of people don't have health insurance. And, people talked about the cost of health insurance, et cetera. Then the fourth theme was environmental health linkages. We asked them about whether they thought farming was a healthy occupation for them or whether it was unhealthy. We asked them questions about pesticides. We asked them about their water quality on their well and whether they tested their water, and if they had a CAFO, and anything about manure spills and so on. So those were environmental questions. Then we asked them questions if they had experienced any weather-related major issues on their particular farm. So in other words, have you suffered from extreme flooding? Have you suffered from completely saturated soils that you weren't able to do your planting at a certain time? Or are you experiencing drought, et cetera? So the idea is to understand how these weather events affect people personally. And then the last one was what their opinion was about climate change. So we read statements, and then we asked them what their opinion was, whether they agreed or disagreed with the sentence that we read. So those were the 6 themes of the interviews. And then to tell you where we are right now, we're in the process of analyzing all the data. And as you imagine, interviewing all those people, we have lots and lots and lots of data. And so we're going through not just the quantitative analysis that Rob's going to talk about next, and but we're also doing the analysis of all the qualitative data for the interviews, and we're starting to write it up. Eventually, we would like to go back and visit all the farmers on their own turf and kind of do some workshop type things to listen again more of what they want, what their goals are, and then how we might be able to give them ideas about how they can accomplish some of those goals. So I know that was a long thing, but hopefully that gives a pretty good summary about what our project is all about.
Yeah, love it, Carolyn. Thank you so much. Let's pass the baton to Ann Wolf. Ann, you're one of the directors of this project. How have things evolved from the inception of the project to now you've completed a lot of the work and you're getting the results? Tell us some of the top line findings that you're starting to see from this and how things have changed since the conception of the project.
Well, I want to, thank you very much for having us here this morning. We were excited to be here. I want to basically begin by saying I think I was in the right place at the right time. And I was working on a project here in Iowa. I live in Des Moines, Iowa. And I was involved with a committee with Rehi, Mariquin Heslop, and the Regeneration Agricultural Alliance program. And we were at a conference in Iowa City, Iowa, and one thing sort of led to another. And I basically got introduced to the Organic Consumer Association, Pat Kerrigan. I attended a Moses conference a few years ago, and I just was introduced into this group of cohorts, our team, and we got involved with working on our Midwest Healthy Ag project. That's it in a very short nutshell. I come to the table, served as Iowa Heartland Resource Conservation and Development Executive Director. That position has been going on for the past 4.5 years. And then I certainly serve as co-program director with Midwest Healthy Ag. I'm third generation owner of a 300-acre farm in Jackson County, Iowa. So I've been in ag my entire life. And needless to say, my farm is located within a mile of the Mississippi. So I've certainly experienced a lot of weather conditions living in the karst driftless region of the state. There's been, severe weather. I had 11.5-inch rain in 5 hours in 2015, and just being inundated with that type of extreme weather condition. And I've been involved with a lot of organizations throughout the years, in agriculture. I still sit on several boards here in the state of Iowa and nationally, involving ag and conservation and so on and so forth. This particular project has actually been really wonderful because in my background, I have a master's degree, which I just got this past summer in nonprofit leadership and development from the University of Northern Iowa. The one thing I did not have in my background was science. I guess there's only so much you can do in your life. But this has been a wonderful opportunity for me to work with a team of people who've been more concentrated in science, epidemiology, research. I've certainly had the actual hands-on experiential learning opportunity being with the farm, and knowing what I've had to do with it. But it's been a wonderful experience learning these other disciplines, working with a team like I've worked with. And I certainly welcome that opportunity. I just didn't have that. So you learn different perspectives of agriculture from, different people in trained disciplines. So that, that has added to my knowledge about, my farm in many ways and how I want to manage it. So it's been a very exciting project. We'd like to continue. We still have 6 more states that we'd like to kind of bring into the fold of what we've learned. The other thing that's been informative for me as a farmer, as an agricultural individual, is that listening to the interviews that have been held by other people across, the different states, and all our farms are unique and different, but I see commonality in my perceptions of what I've had to personally experience with my farm, no matter what the circumstance might be, and listening and reading to the interviews of what Carolyn and Serena have experienced talking to others. So there's that little bit of knowledge input, a little bit of comparative experience that, from a personal standpoint, I've enjoyed. And I've certainly enjoyed the opportunity for the past 2.5 years to work with this team. I've learned quite a bit.
If I may, Anne's point about learning stuff from the science end is that's wonderful, and it goes the other way for sure, because I was, I'm a standard egghead. I, got a degree at a university. I learned a lot of things. There's nothing wrong with that, but the science that we engage in this work is so much different. It's very different. It's it's a co-participatory science where farmers and scientists work together. I'm not a farmer. I don't know all things farming at all. It's very important to work with the people who are working the land and have a different perspective about things. And it's the hard work, and I think we've done a really good job of negotiating it, is getting the various different kinds of expertise. And I'm not talking about like disciplines at a university. I'm talking about people who know farming, people who know supply chains, people who know, yes, the natural sciences, and such, and geography and all that together, and working around a table, working through, well, what should this index be? Carolyn showed us this map, and maybe we can go more into that map. But it's kind of like, what variables are we going to choose to include in there, and how do we interpret things? And as Carolyn described, our study is very much a multi-level study. So it's a lot going on. Like, we want to look at stuff at 30,000 feet and look at how the entire region of the Midwest is proportioned in terms of the different types of agriculture. But we also want to very much listen and learn from farmers by having these kind of close and intimate conversations with them, and kind of see if those two things speak to each other. Carolyn brought up that Pat really put us on the spot in a really good way. When he first came to us for this project, I was like, oh, that's great. Let's look at 2 or 3 counties. We can start that off as a pilot program. He's like, no, I want to do 12 states. And, it's crazy and at the same time wonderful, because it really speaks to the what Regeneration Midwest is going for. And that is the notion of a regional kind of perspective of things. And there's a lot of wonderful projects happening farm to farm in terms of regenerative production, and all sorts of wonderful ideas. And you get that from the interviews with many of the farmers. But to look at this, as Carolyn brought up, we see regenerative ag is extending out into the community level. That it might be a bunch of neighborhood. A neighborhood of farms, but beyond that, at the county level, and beyond that to the state, and then finally to the regional level. And already just hiring our state coordinators from each of these states and having them come together. And then all of a sudden, although I think Regeneration Midwest had good contacts in places like Minnesota and Iowa and Wisconsin and Nebraska, this project offered the opportunity to start to reach into states that there was less contact with. So, bringing in Kansas, bringing in Illinois, although I think Illinois was part of this as well previously, now that I remember. But, now that we start to extend, that kind of regional vantage point extends beyond just a few people who know each other meeting up at the Moses Conference, talking about regenerative ag, or through the Rodale Institute. Now we're starting to see a much broader sense, because ultimately any program, regenerative ag, yes, it needs to be tailored to specific counties and what people need in a county. But there's also, any county that wants to move forward requires a larger shift in the public perception and notions of what regenerative ag is. And that requires a more regional perspective as well.
Great. Well, we're getting some participation on Facebook here. And one of the questions that's been put in the chat is, are there classes available for regeneration? I grew up on a farm and I plan on running a farm in the near future. So Corey Melby is behind the scenes interacting with you all in the chat, and he's put some information about Moses and the Rodale Institute. So I encourage you to check that out. But I think that that's an interesting question, because I feel, I haven't read through all of your interview summaries, but I read through all of the interview summaries for Minnesota. And just doing that was a massive education. And I definitely encourage folks, we'll have Corey put a link to Midwest Healthy Ag in the chat. So wonderful resources are being collected through your project. Did you see this as a teaching tool for people who are interested in getting involved in farming? And if not, are you seeing it that way now? What are the opportunities, do you think, for people to learn from your project?
Well, one of the things that we're going to be doing next week, as a matter of fact, is that we are going to be going to the Moses Conference. Rob and I are going to be conducting a workshop. And remember that I said that the one thing that differentiates our project from other regenerative agriculture projects is that we're looking at things more comprehensively from more like a community point of view. So I suggested to the person who asked about, like, what do we do on our farm? What we want to become more regenerative. Moses, which is the Midwest Organic, help me out, somebody, because I don't know exactly what it stands for, but it's an education service. Yeah, it's got the word education in it. Anyway, so Moses offers all kinds of classes, or they have workshops. And on Thursday next week, they do have full day classes about how to change your agricultural practices. So that's a great resource. And then I also mentioned in the chat that Corey shared with you the Rodale Institute. If you want to go organic, they also have classes. So there's, and then another organization is the Savannah Institute, which is they do silva pasturing and, planting with integrating trees, the use of, like, for example, people would plant hickory trees, and then they might graze their pigs underneath them, or integrating animals, the cattle, with their crops, or grazing pasture raised animals, and so on. So anyway, so going back to what we're going to be doing next week, the question was, how are you sharing this information? So Rob and I are going to be conducting a workshop next Saturday, February 26th, at the Moses Conference. Unfortunately, it's not a hybrid conference, so you can't log in remotely. But what we're going to be doing is asking people in the room, what do you think of when you think of the word regenerative? What comes to mind? And what we're really trying to get at is that it's more than just healthy soil, because I think most people are thinking regeneration means making sure that we have a cycle with the soil, and that we produce healthy soil, and that we can be more productive and actually build healthy soil through agriculture. But we're really trying to get at, what else does it mean to be regenerative? Like, how can a community support this kind of a lifestyle? So for example, if a community doesn't have the resources that they need to, for example, process a different type of grain or not process, but even hold a different type of grain besides corn and soybeans, like, can the community offer resources so that somebody who wants to produce rye or wheat or oats or something like that, that they can take it to a place and they can sell it? Another example would be, what about local meat processing companies? We saw through the pandemic that there were so many weak links in the supply chain. If the Smithfield beef processing plant had to close down because there were so many meat packers who had COVID in the beginning, as you recall, a lot of these plants went down, or they reduced their hours and so on. And that caused a major backlog in how people were able to get their animals harvested. So that identified the opportunity for more local things to be sprung up on the landscape. And so we saw, like in Kansas, for example, I think there was a meat processing plant that shut down. And during the pandemic, 3 brand new meat processing facilities came onto the scene. And so people were really excited about that, because it gives people more local control over what's going on. So those are the types of questions that we're going to be asking people. What does it mean to you to be regenerative? And how is it that we can build this kind of infrastructure on the ground? A supply chain would be an example of that. Like, how can people who are involved at the production level, like, how can they get involved in some of these alternative crops or resources that the farmers can bring to market? So those are some examples of what we're going to be talking about. And I could go on and on about many examples that we have from talking to people on the landscape of things that they did. The pandemic was an opportunity for people to pivot. And so I'll stop, but I have a few more examples, but maybe somebody else should say something for a minute.
Well, I'd love for Anne to comment, both as the director of this project, or co-director of this project, and a farmer. Did you find it educational as a farmer to see what other farmers are doing, how they solve problems, what sort of marketing they do, what are they doing on their farm? I know you have a lot of experience as a farmer, but what did you learn from this?
Where my farm is located and the community and the farms around my farm, it's mainly what they classify as conventional farming. Just about everybody who owns a farm around my farm works off the farm at a full-time job. Like in the Quad Cities, that could be Cargill or or John Deere. Those type of jobs and careers, the pandemic didn't really affect what I want to say my farm neighborhood. Life went on as it always did. I think maybe I heard one of the farmers say to me, well, they were concerned with the pandemic, about getting their cattle to market, just like Carolyn had suggested, with the staff not being, at a meat packing plant or wherever they were going to take it down to the Quad City area on the eastern side of the state. But for the most part, again, in my farm community, life went on as it always did. So that's the only perspective I can, throw in there from a personal perspective, was that life wasn't any different. I think the farmers, as we learned in a lot of our interviews and the research, because of the pandemic, a lot of farmers did quite well with government payments. The interviews obviously showed that a lot of farmers had a banner year for income. So I would want to say that probably reflects what I saw around my farm community as well. With my type of farm operation right now, just the way the history of the farm has been, I have a lot of my farm ground in USDA, NRCS, CRP, a lot of acronyms there.
Let's spell them out. What are these acronyms?
Well, it's CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, and it's been around for decades. So with the pandemic didn't influence me because I was already in a government plant program. And, these programs last 10, 15 years, 5 years, however many years you want to sign up for them. So the pandemic didn't affect or influence my farm operation or my farm income per se, just because I was already grandfathered into a payment federal government system anyway. But yeah, life went on as normal around my farm area. So.
Yeah, Carolyn, you said that you had some examples that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about a few of the things that we learned through the interviews in terms of how people are changing on at the landscape level. And a lot of this stuff did come about because of the pandemic. So I'd like to mention a few things. Like, for example, like we mentioned before, Robert Wood Johnson is a healthcare organization. So a lot of a philanthropic healthcare foundation. So a lot of the questions that we asked were about healthcare and so on. So I'm going to mention two things that we learned about healthcare. One of them is that rural residents had the opportunity to participate in telemedicine. And that was something that was a new thing, like, for example, especially with mental health. So they were able, for the first time ever, to meet with a therapist using telemedicine. And I think that that's a really important breakthrough, because that a lot of farmers suffer from depression because they're under so much financial stress, et cetera. So I think farmers they had the opportunity for them or themselves or their families, for them or their families to be able to meet with a mental health care specialist online. And I think that was a really good opportunity for people that, I think, through, the tradition of mental health therapy, people always have to go in person. So this was a big breakthrough, I think. And a lot of people also talked about that they were able to see a specialist, for example, using using telemedicine. So, for example, like, we interviewed somebody who had a child with special needs, and instead of them having to make a 4-hour round trip visit to this specialist in a remote city, they were able to have their doctor visit over the internet or whatever, the Zoom or what have you. So some of those things I think were new for the first time. And I think that some of those are going to continue into the future. So I think that rural residents were provided new opportunities that are going to help them live in their rural community and feel like they're getting the services they need. A second thing about healthcare that we learned from the interviews is that a lot of people don't have health insurance. And what we learned is, once again, the poor get poorer, the rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. So people who do have health care, Anne mentioned that there are spouses working off the farm, that a lot of people have a spouse who works off the farm. We had people who said to us, my wife wanted to quit her job and I told her she couldn't because we need the health insurance. That was not just one person saying that. A lot of people said that their family life would be better if they did not have the spouse working off the farm, but they needed the health insurance. So that was one thing. And then the other thing is that a lot of the farmers who do CSA vegetable farming, or they do farmers markets, a lot of people like that don't have health insurance. They may have Obamacare, they may get health insurance through the Affordable Care Act, but they may not, they may make too much money to be able to get health insurance through Medicaid. They don't qualify for Medicaid, but they're in that, the higher of the poverty-stricken people. I mean, it was amazing to me how many people who are doing that kind of farming don't have health insurance. And farming is a dangerous occupation. There's many accidents that can occur. People talked a lot about farm safety and that kind of thing. So that's another thing that we learned, is that it brought out some of the health inequities that we have going on in the country. And so, okay, then on the flip side, I'm going to tell you about a few of the things that we learned related to people being successful during the pandemic and some of the ways that they pivoted, like I said before. Like, for example, in Minnesota, one of the things that many people, we talk to people in St. Louis County, which goes from Duluth all the way up to the Canadian border. So if you think of the Boundary Waters, it's a very rural area. There's not conventional farming going on there. There's a lot of people doing more regenerative type of farming, small productions, maybe a diversity of animals on their operation, or they're trying different types of crops and so on. So there, the traditional model is that people would sell their products through a farmer's market or through a CSA, community supported agriculture, where you go to somebody's house and you pick up your box once a week. Well, what some of the people up there did was they formed what was called a REKO, which I'm not sure even how you pronounce that, but it's an acronym and it's spelled REKO. And a REKO is a Finnish word, I believe. It's an acronym for a Finnish words. And those were sort of cooperatives that were formed on the fly through the internet. And so farmers were able to get together and say, okay, I'm growing, I have chickens. And then another person says, I have maple syrup and I have honey. And another person says, well, I'm an egg farmer. And traditionally, they might have gone to the farmer's market and only sold that one product. So somebody who was a cheesemaker and made their own cheese, and somebody who made soap, and somebody who had goat's milk lotion, and somebody who had vegetables would get together over the internet, and they would provide all their products, and somebody could order any one of these products. And then it was the thing that's different from a farmer's market, is that they would go to a place like a parking lot of a grocery store or whatever, and they would go and pick up their order. But it was a conglomeration of different producers that were providing the resources to what it was that people wanted. And so that way a lot of people talked about the time stress that working at a farmer's market puts on their weekly operation, or if they have children, they need to get childcare and so on. So the REKO is only open for 1 hour, like Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. And then you go to the pickup place, and then you get all these different products that are being produced by the different types of producers. And so I think a lot of people found that to be very successful. And that was one thing that I thought was really cool. There's other ones in other states, but that's the one where I learned that word REKO.
Yeah.
So you weigh in with your favorite examples. I'm sorry, Carolyn, did you have another example that you wanted to talk about?
I have two more examples. One is that, you're talking about what did we learn and so on. A lot of people also talked about that they did, Anne mentioned that people did well financially. A lot of the farmers market people and CSA vegetable farmers had their best year ever because people were staying home and cooking their own food. And so their products were flying off the shelves, so to speak. And also for local meat producers, people who sold directly to their consumers, they did really well as well. And then the final thing that I was going to talk about is that in terms of finances and what people got in terms of the federal subsidies. I think this is, again, another really good example of inequities that we were experiencing, is that the people who were producing conventionally, so they were doing corn and soybeans, and they had, maybe they were livestock farmers. They did very well financially in terms of federal subsidies. The people on the other end of the spectrum, the vegetable producers, a lot of them were not eligible for the same types of federal subsidies. And maybe they got a little bit of money, PPP loans, and where they could pay their staff or what have you. But a lot of people did not get the same kind of federal subsidies as the people on the other end of the spectrum. I mean, we're talking about some people getting hundreds of thousands of dollars based on the number of livestock that they had on their farm.
Yeah, it's really amazing, all those examples that Carolyn went through, and it really speaks to some sense of, Kerrigan's legacy of getting us to do more than just a couple counties, because we have gotten so much data in and so many interviews, and the expanse of it. And Carolyn has spoken about this like it's trying to drink water out of a fire hose. We have so much coming in, but the examples and the contrasts are amazing. And you really get a sense of the kind of complexity and diversity of practices across the Midwest. I mean, some of our states are larger than whole countries elsewhere. So the notion that there's regenerative this and then there's conventional that is, it's all a mix of things going all around. And it's not just because we have different bioregions, like different soils, different water and all that. I mean, it has to do with the history of these counties. And so we are developing these kind of county historiographies, where our 12 counties that we're looking at their histories from the beginning of their geology through, Native American presence, the settler histories, all the way through to modern day, to see how those histories set the kind of strange configuration of demographics and farming in each of these counties, because history matters. It has a lot to do with how any of our counties came around, and so we're trying to make sure to kind of weave this in along with the kind of all the statistical analyses and all the interviews that we're doing as well. And what's interesting, and I think Carolyn brought up some examples, is that the success of a regenerative farm isn't just based on sweat and blood and hard work and the right decisions that are happening on farm. And you can do that all right and still it not pay off, in part because of the larger county context that you're in. And we spoke to a farmer in Nebraska who's setting up a kind of regenerative piggery, and in essence, the farmer was isolated, and it was very difficult to do his work. And on the other hand, the kind of St. Louis County that Carolyn brought up is, although it's not, mining's a big deal in northern Minnesota, but there is agriculture ongoing, not much conventional ag, but there is, in other words, the organizing that the farmers did over many decades led to kind of the supply lines that allow markets for which regenerative farmers can sell things, and also inputs. The inputs are circulating within county, the revenue circulating within county, so you don't have to compete against these huge conventional operations around. We have, on the other hand, we had another farmer in Kansas who was like the only regenerative farmer within 3 counties, right? I mean, and yet he made it work. And in part because he was able to build up relationships with more conventional farmers in the area. And so this is the take home for me that came out of this, is that, this isn't, we can understand the importance of promoting the regenerative position, but there's regenerative ag, and then there's regenerative ag, there's conventional ag, and then there's conventional ag. There's a whole spectrum of kinds of production that's happening across the Midwest region. You can see that at the county level. The maps that Carolyn showed, they're various shades. It's not like blocked off into this part is all conventional, this is all regenerative. It's not by state. You have swaths of Minnesota, swaths of Wisconsin that are, more regenerative, but they're regenerative for different reasons, right? Northern Minnesota has a lot more forestry, not much conventional production, so that makes whatever little farming happening. Sorry, I'm gonna kill this phone here. so that the northern Minnesota is basically protected from conventional production, although that might be changing with the onset of climate change, and conventional production, as it kind of destroys the counties that it's in, starts to move looking other places. And you see stories about how in Minnesota or Wisconsin, a county basically fights off the presence of a CAFO, a confined animal feedlot operation. You have, at the same time, we see it at the farmer level as well. All the farmers we interview, they're not just into blocks of conventional and regenerative, and some of our recent work got into the ways that our 100 farmers were basically divided largely more into 4 different kinds of clusters that based on the practices that they had on their farm. And some farmers, conventional farmers, are moving or returning to more the kind of what we call basic regenerative practices, cover crops and such. And then other farmers are more the advanced stage of doing kind of local sales and stuff. And so there's these different combinations of practices. And we're all about more about, yes, we love regenerative ag, but we're also about more of a kind of a notion that wherever you are, as an individual farmer or as a county, there's room for moving in a direction of becoming more regenerative. And, if a conventional county, and we can understand how, if we're looking at the histories and we see a county arrive at a conventional production, and it might be, as Anne's work on some counties in Iowa shows, it might be because of the advent of the railroad that led to the emergence of export economy, right? So you're going back 130 years in which a county gets locked into conventional production, and that's hard to get out of. On the other hand, there is still room. And so how do we help counties kind of break out of those kind of ratchets of production where it's really hard to move out of conventional production to more regenerative practices? Although, again, some counties are doing it. Other counties, we visited Dodge County in Wisconsin. That was ostensibly our conventional county, but we've discovered amazing things going on there. The farmers helped set up an organization. They're working with people who are interested in healthy rivers. So healthy soils, healthy rivers are working together. And so this notion of conventional bad, regenerative great, there's a lot more nuance going on, and also windows of opportunity by which we can move the entire region in a more regenerative direction. And basically, we are at a historical precipice. These are difficult days. We're at a generational moment in which, we have to make these shifts, and we have to learn to work with people and talk to people we don't necessarily agree with. But on one hand, we might actually discover that in the course of talking to people, you discover that there are a lot of commonalities and ways of thinking and being and working through and trying. And this is, for me, the critical point is kind of moving agriculture away from what we call an industrial economy and moving it in a direction of back to some notion of a natural economy, because the things we grow have something to do with nature, right? They're very much integrated into the cycles of ecology and geology and earth, and also community. And we very much see, as Carolyn brought up, a very holistic notions of what regenerative ag is. And we don't want really wonderful people who are trying to do the right thing by moving to regenerative practices on their farm to be stranded, right? We want them to be part and parcel of larger communities that can support their efforts, and that, we can have positive cycles and virtuous cycles rather than vicious cycles in which people feel like because they have bills to pay in the next quarter, they have to grow all the way to the river's edge. And we would rather go more to a virtuous cycle when people are rewarded for doing the right thing in terms of raising nutritious food in an ecologically friendly way, and feeding people in their local area, and having revenue circulate within the county border. And we can get to in that direction. And we believe our project really shows that a lot of the pieces are in place to do that. But there's a lot of hard work, a generational project really, to get us to that moment where we can, again, have an agriculture that speaks to land and community.
Yes, I want to pass to Anne again, but I just want to comment a bit on what you were saying, Rob. I found it interesting reading the Minnesota. It was a summary of the interviews that you all did in Minnesota. I didn't see them public on the website. Are these going to be so they will never become public?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, everything that we did was confidential with the farmers, so they're not identified in any of our reporting. They're not going to be identified by name. But we will publish. We are in the process of pulling together multiple publications, and then anyway, so in terms of are these going to be publicly available, the answer is we're in the process of writing summary reports for each of the states, and each person's individual name will be taken out, but it's going to be a compilation of what we've learned. And then if we did want to share any interviews, we would have to ask the person's permission ahead of time. Corey was mentioning in a private chat that he would like to have some of the people share their stories. Like if we asked some people, would you be interested in sharing your story as a podcast? And I think we could revisit that idea. There are so many fascinating people that we talk to. And, speaking about people in Minnesota, we did interview a bunch of Native American farmers, and I think they had a lot of really interesting stories. So those were some of the first that come to my mind, depending on what your audience is or who your audience is. I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating. So I guess sorry to share that I had been able to see confidential parts of the report, but of course I wouldn't share them. And I understand. So the interviews were very intimate. I was thinking about that. I was like, wow, they're like you were talking about earlier. You asked intimate questions about health, about how people were accessing health, including mental health. So it makes total sense that these would not become public in that way, but that they would become part of a narrative so that the information could be shared without revealing the intimate details of people's daily lives. Makes a lot of sense. Yes, Carolyn, so you just mentioned that in your Minnesota interviews, you did talk with a lot of Native Americans, and I found that very interesting. We're living in a very interesting time where we have basically like thousands of years of human history visible to us and still alive in their traditions. And so you did speak to people who are actively engaged in hunting, fishing, wild rice gathering. So they are maintaining these thousands and thousands of year old traditions. And then that goes all the way up to like the same, maybe not the exact same Native American communities. They're interested very much in exploring aeroponics, ways to grow crops entirely indoors in completely artificial environments. So we're seeing this huge continuum right up to the very most modern technological innovations. And so we have, I think we're at this moment where humans get to decide like, what do we want to keep and how far into the technology do we want to go? And it's a completely open question. Maybe not all of the options are on the table because of our economic circumstances and the environmental impacts that our choices have made so far. I mean, certainly the Native Americans cannot access all of the food sources that they once did because there are animals that are no longer in their environment that were part of their food system. So, but I want to turn that question to Anne, because Rob, you were talking about one of the things that you guys are obviously seeking is what are the drivers of the movement to more regenerative practices. And so, Anne, with your expertise in Iowa, I want to ask you what your thoughts are on that. And also, I'm wondering if you guys are seeing a sort of segregation from these various viewpoints, like the people who are still hunting and fishing and making that a daily piece of their food system compared to the folks who are in a highly globalized food system. And so, Anne, I think you can speak to that as well.
Well, recently, I think Carolyn might have forwarded a paper to our team, and I read it. It was a white paper, and I ran across a term that I thought was applicable to sort of my perspective with my farm operation. And I'd not heard it before. I can't imagine how I could have avoided it. But anyway, conservation agriculture. And I thought, I like that term because it applies very much so to what I've been doing on my farm for decades, between buffer strips and no-till and installing a wetland and working with the NRCS and pollinator habitat and on and on and on and on. And I think a lot of the conservation agriculture would be applicable to me is because of one, where my farm is located. I kind of grasp a hold of that term because my proximity to so many waterways, the Mississippi, the Maquoketa River is a quarter mile away. I mean, I'm originally from Clinton, Iowa. I grew up along the Mississippi, in it, on it, under it, around it, and I'm still there. I just love the river. So I like the term of conservation agriculture because I think because of a lot of the programs I've had to employ and apply to my farm operation had to be in controlling heavy soil erosion. When you're in that driftless region of Iowa, the karst topography, which is entirely different than the Des Moines lobe in the northern central part of the state. Of course, all soil is highly erodible. But I mean, it's a constant battle to keep the soil in place. And, I've been forced to, but I wanted to apply a lot of conservation in controlling that erodible soil and everything that kind of goes along with it. I think there's another, and we've touched about this. I think every farm has a multiplier of actions and procedures that they use. There isn't necessarily one farm that's completely conventional, one farm that's completely regenerative. I mean, we all have to employ a lot of different practices in our farms. The farm, the topography, the geography, the commodities, all demand that of us to, really have a broad perspective of what we have to do to sustain our farm operation. Agriculture is extremely complicated. Especially nowadays, there's so many options and different opportunities to do what you think might work with your system, or if you want to change it, where do you go to find those resources? Extension services from the universities, the USDA, NRCS, meetings, groups. There's a number of organizations you can belong to network and learn and learn those best methodologies and best practices for your farm operation. It's a never-ending learning cycle, and really nothing really seems to be the same thing twice. So a couple of words I do want to always like to reflect back on because of what I've been exposed with my farm is you need to find a balance. Whether it's the economy of a balance in being in agriculture or the environment or whatever it is you're trying to do, try to maintain a balance, and you can define just exactly where you want to slip that word into. And I think, Alexis, your question to me was the movement. You were questioning a movement by my best practices with my farm operation. Where am I kind of going with what I'm doing? Because of the topography and geography, I'm going to reflect back on this. It's always paramount in any project or program I'm doing. It's like one thing always seems to affect the other. If I'm putting a berm in because I've got a high runoff from an adjacent farm field and the silt is filling up in my wetland down at the portion of my alluvial fan, I've got to put in a berm because I can't keep that soil in place. And I've got a huge silt infiltration going into my wetland. And then I have to dredge the wetland out. So, I mean, a farm, one thing always affects another, whether, a CAFO operation, and then you have your manure tanks or your manure holds, your lagoons. I mean, everything is affected by every other activity you do. And so you have to step in and do mitigation procedures in order to find that balance, So agriculture is challenging, but it's a great opportunity too.
Yeah, I mean, what Anne's getting at about farmers being very much not just about producing food, but helping produce whole landscapes and community, and I, that's a fundamental part of the way we view things, and we hope to, our project is wrapping up its first phase, and we're going to continue to do this kind of analysis, and we're looking for applying for funding to be able to continue to do the research, continue our analysis. As we described here today, we just kind of started presenting the kind of a little bit of the fire hose of data that we've got in, but we need a couple more years to work through all this. A lot of programs, maybe we'll interview 5 or 15 farmers, and we've interviewed 100 over 6 states. And we also want to move on to the other 6 states in the Midwest. So we're also looking for funding in that direction as well, and to really get the kind of regional landscape or vision of this that we found to be such an important part of our project. And we'd be happy to talk to people about our work. And if you're interested, reach out to us, and we'd be happy to talk to you.
Well, great. I didn't notice that a whole hour had passed already. I had so many more questions for you. I hope that we will get updates from the Midwest Healthy Ag team, and that Rob and Carolyn and Ann will be willing to come join us again sometime soon to keep this up. But we will follow what you do at Moses. I am feeling the FOMO this year because I can't be there with you all. But keep up the great work. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today, and we'll talk soon.
Wonderful. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.